Hello everyone. We're going to talk a little bit about relative value here, just a quick little discussion on it. On the upper left-hand corner there of the image, there's a value chart, gradients, and that's broken down into 100 different values. So kind of the way it works here, let's see, is that so up here's kind of the lightest value, and then it progresses downward, and then it starts back up again and progresses downward. So you got this kind of movement to darker and darker. Also, you can kind of look across and see how it kind of progresses this way as well. So but you can tell by looking that there's a lot of different there's a lot of kind of variety, and break that. You can kind of break it down into tens. You can break it into hundreds. You can break it into 1,000 grids. The more gradients you have, relative value swaths of tone, the more detailed in a certain way your drawing will look. So what I've done here is kind of isolated some values, and I want to show you kind of what it does, what happens. So the one in red here will be kind of the control value. We'll kind of apply that to these various values here. So let me grab the dropper there and grab that value. Okay, so I'm kind of using this value right here, the darker value, and I'm going to do a swath here. Okay, and then I'll do a smaller one using the control, which is that color up there, or value up there. It's all gray, no color. So I'll grab that, pop that in there. So I'm going to lighten the background here. Here we go. So I've got two values there. Now I'm going to juxtapose the control. So I'm using the same value as right there, that little one. Shrink this down a bit. So you can see that this value right here in the middle is the same as this value, yet this one looks, a heck of a lot brighter or lighter than this one. That's relative value. So your brain's going to kind of play tricks on you. Let's do one more here. So let's go to even lighter value right here for our larger value. Okay. We'll shrink it down a little bit. Now I'm going to go back and grab the control again here. Let me get the dropper. And let's plop that in there. A little larger with that. Okay, so as you can see, the middle values here, right? Those middle ones are the same. I grabbed them from this control up here with circle in red. What's different is the background values of each larger circle are different, in their light and darkness. So what it does is it gives the illusion that the inner value is changing when it's not. So believe it or not, this value right here is the same as that. See that? Okay. So your brain is going to kind of play tricks on you again, right? An endless theme here in relation to application of value. So for instance, the top of the paper bag, as I talked about, is a, let me go back to, let me see here. top of the paper bag in terms of global values, right? Those larger things. The top of the paper bag might have a value scheme that is, I don't know, maybe in this area, right? Something like that. So if you apply very dark value in one of the wrinkles or crinkles in the top of the bag that maybe is in this area, and you apply that to that top of the bag, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. Okay. What you would do to create shadow and dark and light is maybe grabs a value, something like that, and apply it to that global area at the top of the bag, for instance, okay? Conversely, let's say the interior of the bag, you see more of the interior than I do in my view, might have a value scheme, in a global value sense, something around there. If you see a highlighted area in that interior of the bag and you apply maybe something like that over here, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, okay? So you have to kind of scale your application of value within a certain region in order for it to make sense. And that's what I mean by the global value scheme versus the local. So within that top of the bag, there's probably maybe 100 of different value transitions, right? But they all fall within a certain, that's a little big, a certain value scheme, right? Maybe these areas right here or something. The background, if you could see more of the background, that global region might have a value scheme that falls in terms of the value shifts in something like this, right? So you want to be very careful when you're doing a value drawing, which the charcoal drawing is of the paper bag we're doing, of not going overboard in terms of applying value across the entire value scale, right? You got to pace yourself. So you got two things going on. You got global value and, this zone versus this zone versus this zone. So the background is very dark relative to the top of the bag, et cetera, et cetera. Then within those zones, you have the local value shifts, and that's much more subtle, okay? So you got to be really careful about that. Now let's talk just a second about the wrinkles and crinkles and surface area, illusion of kind of texture and surface. So for instance, let's see if this works here. I'm going to do a kind of profile blown up view of maybe what's going on with let's say a wrinkle or a crease in the paper bag. So you have the kind of flat part, and it might kind of be like a valley, right? A crease, if you're looking at it from the side. Now this is hugely exaggerated, right? But I'm doing it to prove a point. So let's say there's a wrinkle or a crease in the paper bag. You got to think about where your light is coming from. It's directional, so it's not always straight above, right? Usually coming from above, but maybe at a little bit of a 45-degree angle, maybe, right? And that's why you want to think about lighting. So if that's the case, then let me change this here. Then when the light comes down, this area right here, the flat part of the paper bag, because of physics here, would be maybe a neutral tone, right? A neutral value. But this area, where the light's hitting it directly, highlight. Whereas this area, not getting much light, right? That plane right there, not getting much light. So you got three overly simplistic terms here, values that you need to deal with here. You got a neutral value here, kind of getting light at the light's coming down and hitting that at a 45-degree angle, right? So maybe neutral value. Light's hitting this directly and bouncing back to your eyes, highlight. This is in shadow, right? So you're not seeing, that's going to be for the crease or the wrinkle, the dark area. So you got to kind of really analyze. These various regions. Let's do another example here. So let's think in terms of larger scale. So you get the surface of the bag, for instance, right? And then you get the drop off. That's the vertical dimension, right? Again, I'm looking at the profile here, right? So let's say you got a 45-degree angle of light coming down. All right. So kind of do the inverse here. This is getting more light, obviously, than this, right? So you got your light coming down at a 45-degree angle, right? This is a somewhat shaded area right in here, right? It's not getting the direct light that this is. So this light's coming down, hitting the top of the bag, bouncing back up to your eye. That's highlight. This is not. Okay, so those are the larger global regions that I talked about, the top of the bag versus the side. Even though in this, in this area here, there's undulations and a bunch of stuff going on in here, right? That's the local value scheme. This overall area would be darker than this area, right? That's the global versus local value schemes, okay? So let's look at one more example. Let's do a little blow up here again of maybe something that's happening on the surface of the top of that bag. So instead of a kind of a valley, right? Let's look at a raised area. Same principle is going on here. So let's say you have a kind of an area that's moving upward, maybe a plateau, and then an area moving down, and and that in the microscopic sense, that's happening on the top of that bag, little crinkles and wrinkles and folds, and so again, 45-degree angle. Let's say the light's coming in kind of a 30 or 45-degree angle, something like that, maybe a little bit more severe. Obviously, let me go back here. Highlighted area here where this the angle of this passage, and it's not going to happen in just one place, it's going to happen all over the bag, is catching the light directly. Neutral, where it's not catching the light directly. And shadow, or more of a shadow, where the light is kind of coming in at a skewed angle, right? Okay, so that's how you deal with the textures. You got to kind of subtly shift those values. You're going to have an overall neutral value against which you will, in this case, which would be the flat surface, right? Against which you'll do a highlight and a shadow. Now, multiply that a lot of times, right, to get those very subtle kind of undulations on the top of that bag. And you're able to kind of reveal, both in terms of the raised areas and the creases or the wrinkles, the textural nature of that material, right? A crumpled paper, right? And doing it in such a way that you're not disrupting the local value scheme in that area, one area, whatever you happen to practice, or whatever area you happen to be focusing on. Okay, again, the vertical, the side of the bag, which is vertical, generally speaking, if the light's coming down from above or at a 45-degree angle or something like that, and cross light, is going to not catch as much light as the top of the bag, right? So that whole, on the side of the bag, that whole value scheme, right, in that local area is going to be stepped down, maybe something like that, right? Where the value scheme of the top of the bag may be something like this. Where the value scheme of the inside of the bag may be something like this, okay? So you got to kind of really be careful and think about that stuff as you create your, as you develop the value in your drawing. The idea of the global, those big zones, relationship to one another, that's relative value. Top of the bag has a certain overall value relation to the background, right? Dark versus light, or dark versus neutral, whatever the case may be. versus the side, which is something in between, et cetera, et cetera. And then within those zones, very subtle gradations to create those that illusion of in this case, crumpled paper, right? Brown paper, whatever the case may be, in terms of whatever type of bag you're using. So just a kind of quick little tutorial in terms of relative value, how value is read in terms of its position relative to other values, right? So you got to be very careful about that. You don't want to kind of jump the gun and put a really dark value in a crinkle area on the top of the bag. It'll be disruptive to the whole integrity of the drawing. Okay, that's I guess all I really need to say right now in terms of value, and you'll find this out as you develop the drawing. And again, use the straight edge when you do that, because it'll give you that kind of crisp edge, the ability to kind of see the two different values as they relate to one another, whatever value you happen to be doing or creating. And you can always add and subtract, right? The way we're making things lighter in this drawing is through erasure and using the white of the paper underneath, to lighten up a particular value. It's not all about darkening. You've got to kind of move back and forth between lightening and darkening for this drawing. It's a very, very subtle engagement that you have to kind of follow here. So, okay. Well, thanks much. I appreciate it.